I wake up the same way every morning, slowly, cautiously, and with a plan. My body doesn't let me leap out of bed like it used to. Every joint has to be negotiated with every movement coordinated like a fragile excavation. You don't just get up when you're 81, you strategize. Right leg first, it's the least rebellious one. Lean into the nightstand. Pull the left leg gently. Deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. Now. Stand. It hurts. Not a scream out loud hurt, but the kind that crawls into your bones and whispers, "You're not young anymore." But I stand. Swaying like a desert reed, I stand. And that, on most days, is my first win. My cane leans patiently against the wall beside the dresser. The wood is worn smooth where my fingers have curled around it thousands of times. I bought it in Morocco in 1982, back when it was just an accessory, something fashionable, a conversation starter on digs. Now it's my lifeline. Without it, I wouldn't risk a step. 4 steps to the bathroom. I count them every day. Funny, I once climbed limestone cliffs to reach the entrance of an untouched burial site in Ethiopia. Now 4 steps feel like an odyssey. In the mirror, I face her me. Eleanor Vaughn, grey hair pulled into a bun that always leans left by mid-morning. Wrinkles map my face like an ancient parchment, each line carved by sunwind and worry. But my eyes, they're still mine. Green sharp and oddly amused at what age has done to everything else. I dress simply. Cotton dress, flat shoes, no jewelry, except for my wedding band, which I still wear even though Richard passed 12 years ago. We spent our lives studying bones, but his loss shattered me in ways no fossilized femur ever could. Down the stairs, 15 in total, I grip the banister like it might betray me. At the bottom, I pause, breathing, checking my pulse. It's my version of a morning ritual. No yoga, no green smoothies, just survival. The kettle whistles by the time I reach the kitchen. My house, this old place in a sleepy New Jersey suburb, isn't just shelter. It's a museum of sorts. Every shelf, every wall holds remnants of a life spent digging into ancient dust photos from my days in Jordan, trinkets from Turkey, a copy of a 7th century figurine we found in the Iranian plateau. Most people my age have pictures of grandkids on their mantle. I have a replica of a 3,000-year-old fertility goddess in terracotta. Don't get me wrong, I do have a family, a son, a daughter-in-law, a granddaughter, even a great-granddaughter now. But most days I feel more seen by the shadows in my study than I do by any of them. I sip my tea by the window, watching the world stretch awake. Mr. Callahan is walking his beagle. The teenage girl next door is biking to school with earbuds jammed in. None of them know who I am. That I once lectured at Oxford. That I've held artifacts older than Christianity in my hands. That a dig I led in 1979 changed the dating of an entire ancient culture. At 9:02, the mailbox clangs shut. Mail's here, bills, catalogues, some pamphlet trying to sell me a stair lift. But today, nestled between the dull paperweights of routine, is an envelope from Oxford University. My hands shake not from arthritis, but something closer to anticipation. It's from Ruth Calderon, one of my former students, now a respected professor in her own right. We hadn't spoken in years. I squint to read. Dear Dr. Vaughn, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing regarding a recent excavation in Syria. We've unearthed burial shards that bear striking resemblance to the ones you analyzed in your 1986 paper on nomadic tribal migration patterns. I was hoping you might take a look at some images. Your insight would be invaluable. I press the letter to my chest. It's silly, but I do. Because for a fleeting second I feel needed. I carry the envelope into my study. The photos are printed in full color, blurry but familiar. The hatch marks the curve of the clay. They whisper to me in a language I haven't spoken in years. This means something, I think. This could change things. The phone rings. I jump. Old habit. Years of fieldwork taught me to brace when the unexpected cuts through the quiet. Sometimes it was just wind. Other times snakes, landslides, once armed men. Mama voice slices in. Martin, my son, I'm dropping by in an hour. We need to talk about the family barbecue this Saturday. No hello, no how are you, just agenda. I'm home, I reply flatly. He doesn't pick up on the sarcasm, never does. I'll stop by. Heather wants you to come. Don't overthink it. He hangs up before I can respond. I stare at the phone, still buzzing with silence. And I feel it again, that split between the woman I was and the woman they treat me as now. Martin doesn't visit. He checks in. As though I'm a fire alarm battery he has to replace. I glance back at the photos from Ruth. They don't see me anymore, but the bones still do. The bones remember. And maybe it's time I reminded the world who I really am. The knock on the door came right on time. Martin had always been punctual, as if being precisely on schedule made up for the emotional absence that trailed him like an invisible fog. I shuffled to the door with my cane in one hand and a plate of oatmeal cookies in the other. He didn't like sweets anymore. Heather had him on some rigid health routine, but I baked them anyway. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of defiance, maybe out of hope. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. He glanced around like a landlord checking the property, eyes sweeping over the floor. My shoes by the door, the stack of archaeological journals on the table. "Smells like cinnamon." "It is," I said. "Cookies, fresh out of the oven." Martin didn't reply. He never did, not to the cookies, not to the photographs on the wall, not to anything that reminded him of who I used to be. He sat at the edge of the couch like someone trying not to sink into a stranger's cushions. I eased myself into my favorite chair leather with sturdy armrests that helped me stand when my knees protested. "I assume this is about the barbecue," I said, pouring tea. "Yes," he replied, glancing at his watch. "Saturday, 3 o'clock. Heather wants you to come. So does Milo." That last part was a lie. Milo might have wanted me there, but Heather certainly didn't. She'd barely spoken to me the last 3 family events, and when she did, it was always a variation of "Grandma, are you comfortable?" in the same tone someone would use with a stray cat. "I'll come," I said. "Do I need to bring anything?" Martin hesitated. "No, Heather's taking care of everything." I remembered the last time I brought something. A pie baked from scratch. Heather set it aside without touching it, saying, "We're not sure what's in this, and Chris is allergic to everything." She didn't say it unkindly, but she didn't have to. I nodded and sipped my tea. "I got an interesting letter today, from Ruth Calderon." He blinked. "Ruth who?" "My former student. She's a professor now. Oxford. They found something in Syria ceramics similar to what I catalogued in the 80s. She wants my input." Martin gave a polite half-smile, already bored. "Still looking at those old bones, huh? Shards, not bones. And yes, they matter." "To you maybe," he said, stirring his tea without drinking it. "I mean, who else even cares about that kind of stuff anymore? Besides, Mom, you're retired. Why not just enjoy your time?" I looked at him, this tall, slightly balding man in his starched business shirt, and wondered how he became so distant. He used to carry my excavation bag through the desert as a boy, used to beg me to tell stories about tombs and temples. But somewhere between teenage embarrassment and adult practicality, he'd erased that part of himself, and it seemed of me too. "I enjoy thinking," I said, "and contributing. It's what keeps me from being a corpse that breathes." Martin sighed as if I was being dramatic. "Just try to keep it light at the barbecue, okay? Don't get into all that ancient history stuff. Nate's office buddies will be there." "Regular folks." "Regular folks," I repeated. God forbid they hear about Mesopotamia." He didn't laugh. He never got my humor. I offered him a cookie. He declined. I offered tea. He sipped it once and set it down. "I'll pick you up at 2:30, he said, already standing. "Be ready." "Do you need anything?" I asked, part habit, part hope. "No, I'm good," he replied, then added quickly, "Do you—" I hesitated. My hearing aid batteries had been dying quicker lately, and I'd run out of spares. I needed a trip to the drugstore, but I could already hear his sigh, feel the tension in his shoulders if I asked. "No," I lied. "I've got everything." He looked relieved, kissed me on the cheek without really making contact. Then he was gone. The house fell quiet again. The kettle let out a final huff of steam. I looked down at the cookies, still warm, still untouched. I stared at the envelope from Oxford sitting on the table beside them. One piece of mail, one letter of recognition, one sign that I was still more than a task on someone's calendar. It's strange, isn't it, that a stranger an ocean away can make you feel more visible than your own flesh and blood across the room. I lifted the photos Ruth had sent, sliding one under my magnifying glass. The hatching on the shard was distinct reminiscent of a style we had uncovered in the Zagros foothills in '86. I jotted a few notes, then smiled. Let them plan their barbecue. Let them whisper about the old lady and her dusty artifacts. They think I'm furniture, something that stays in place and collects dust. But they've forgotten I've spent a lifetime digging up forgotten things, and I know how to make them speak again. The invitation arrived the next morning, tucked inside a pastel envelope that smelled faintly of perfume and plastic. Heather always liked to make things appear more thoughtful than they were. On the front was a printed image of a grill and balloons, and inside, typed of course, were the words, "You are cordially invited to a backyard barbecue in celebration of summer and family. Saturday at 3:00 p.m. Casual attire. Bring your appetite." In blue ink beneath the text, Heather had scrawled, "We hope to see you there." Grammar complete with a smiley face. I turned the card over and over in my hands. No mention of my name. No note of excitement from Leela, my great-granddaughter. No warmth, really. Just obligation dressed in pastel. I imagined her printing out 20 identical cards and scribbling names as an afterthought. Still, I tucked it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a camel I picked up in Petra. I tried to let it go, tried to focus on something else, but it gnawed at me. That evening, I went into the bedroom and sat down in front of my old vanity. I hadn't worn makeup since Richard's funeral, and even then it was barely enough to cover the puffiness of grief. But today, I opened the drawer with slow reverence. I picked a light blue cotton dress, comfortable but dressy enough to signal I had made an effort. I pinned up my hair, smoothed on some powder, and chose a silver brooch, a scarab delicately inlaid with turquoise. A replica of the real one Richard and I uncovered in Egypt during our third expedition together. He gave me this one on our 30th anniversary, calling it a keepsake for a woman who uncovers truth with her hands. I held it in my palm for a moment before fastening it over my chest. There was one more thing, a gift for Leela. I had found a small antique music box at a flea market the month before. It was chipped, but I'd restored it, oiled the gears, polished the wood, and filled the inside with tiny treasures from my life, a pebble from the river Tigris, a smooth glass bead from North Africa, a miniature scroll tied with red thread. None of it worth money, but together they told a story. A story I hoped Leela would grow into, even if she didn't understand it now. I placed it in a soft pouch and set it beside the door. When Saturday came, I woke with a strange tightness in my chest. Not pain, just a weight I couldn't explain. I'd had that feeling before a dust storm buried our site in Jordan, before I stepped into a tomb and realized it wasn't empty. It was a sense that something was off, that the air had changed. Still I dressed, still I prepared, because I had never been the kind of woman to run from difficulty. And besides, I wanted to see Milo. If nothing else, I needed a reminder that someone in that family still had Edgar's eyes. Martin arrived precisely at 2:30. He honked, didn't come to the door, didn't offer to help. When I opened the passenger door, he said, "Are you wearing that? It's going to be hot." I smiled. "Martin, I've spent months in the Sahara. I think I can handle your backyard." He smirked but said nothing more. The car smelled like air freshener and silence. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel the entire 20-minute ride, as if wishing the time would pass quicker if he just made noise. I tried to fill the space. I've been thinking about Ruth's letter. Those fragments, they could shift what we know about migratory pottery traditions in the early Levant. "That's great, Mom," he muttered, eyes fixed on the road. "She's invited me to consult further. Might even publish a paper together." And that was that. Heather and Nate's house came into view, manicured lawn, 2 SUVs in the driveway, a white fence that looked like it had never seen a single scratch. Children's toys littered the yard like props. From the car, I could hear music playing and people laughing. Martin parked but didn't move to open my door. I managed on my own. "Just try not to get into anything deep," he said as we approached the house. "Nate's colleagues are here. They're regular people." "Ah, yes," I nodded. "Heaven forbid they learn anything." Heather greeted us at the door with an air kiss that didn't come within 6 inches of my cheek. "Grandma, you made it. Come in. Everyone's outside already." She took one glance at my brooch, then looked past me. As we passed through the living room, I noticed the family photos on the mantel. None of them were mine. None of them featured me. Every frame was filled with Nate's parents, Heather's siblings' vacation shots I hadn't been invited to. The mug I'd gifted her last Christmas was nowhere to be found. The backyard was a minefield of uneven grass, plastic furniture, and social landmines. I walked slowly, deliberately, my cane sinking into the soft soil. No one looked my way. No one offered help. Chris Martin's wife sat in a circle with some women discussing a new yoga studio. She acknowledged me with a nod, but didn't break conversation. Milo stood near the grill adjusting the music. He spotted me, waved, but didn't approach. Nate was flipping burgers and laughing with a group of men I didn't recognize. I found an empty seat and lowered myself carefully, biting back the twinge in my knee. Leela was across the yard with the other children. I waved, but she didn't see me. Martin walked over with a glass of lemonade. "Here, just don't spill it." I took the cup in silence, staring at him. He didn't even realize the condescension in his tone. To him, I was a fragile relic, something to be handled, not heard. Around me, the party swirled. Laughter, sizzling meat, conversations I couldn't follow, not because of my hearing aid, which was already whining with static, but because they felt so distant. Talks of stock markets, new minivans, and reality shows. I didn't belong here. And I don't think they wanted me to. Then for a moment, Milo broke away and came to sit beside me. "Hey, Grandma," he said, offering a plate. "How are you? It's been a while." And just like that, the world tilted back into balance. I saw Edgar's curiosity in his grandson's face. Milo looked at me like I mattered. "I got a letter from Ruth Calderon," I said, unable to contain my excitement. "She's found ceramics in Syria, similar to our work in '86. Milo leaned in. "Seriously, that's incredible. What kind of markings?" I began explaining the etchings, the regional parallels, the implications, and he listened, truly, listened, asking questions with real interest, until Martin's voice cut through the moment. "Still loading people up with your old bones, Mom," he said with a smirk, beer bottle in hand. "You were always obsessed with that stuff. The spell broke." "I was telling Milo about Ruth's letter," I said evenly. Martin chuckled. "Shards and dust. No one here wants to hear about stuff that's been dead for 1,000 years. Then he grinned. "Why don't you tell us about your new security system instead? Something relevant." It was cruel, deliberately so, and I smiled softly. Because I could feel it. Something inside me was shifting, not breaking, but rising. I didn't decide to get up and walk across the yard. I needed to. My joints were stiffening in the heat, and my hearing aid had started to buzz with that high-pitched whine again, its last desperate attempt to stay alive, before the battery gave out. Conversations around me were starting to sound like they were underwater. I needed to move to stretch to shake off the feeling of being a ghost in my own family. And I wanted to give Leela her gift before the sugar rush and swimming pool chaos took over. The music box weighed slightly in my handbag, a comforting little presence. Something real, something meaningful, something to anchor this day to something more than my humiliation. I rose slowly from the wicker chair, pressing my hand down hard against the armrest to avoid putting too much weight on my hip. My cane was slick with condensation from the grass, but I managed to steady it. Step by step, I began crossing the uneven lawn toward the kids' corner, where Leela and the others were giggling and tossing water balloons. The pool shimmered in the sunlight to my right, its surface a mirror that reflected the cloudless sky and the colorful string lights overhead. I tried not to look at it. Tried not to remember how many summers Richard and I spent swimming in the open desert springs after long hot digs. That water had always been sacred to me, a relief, a ritual. Here it felt like a trap. I was nearly past the edge of the pool when I heard Martin's voice. "Hey, Mom," he called from behind. I turned the motion unsteady. He stood there, grinning broadly, beer in one hand, the other gesturing like a game show host. "You want to go swimming?" Before I could answer, before I could even raise a brow at his poor attempt at humor, I felt it. A shove. Firm, deliberate. Not enough to launch me like a missile, but enough to take me off balance. Enough to let gravity do the rest. My cane slipped from my grip, my feet scrambled. The edge of the pool met my shins. Then the world turned sideways. I hit the water with a splash that silenced the yard for half a second. Cold. Shock. Pressure. My dress ballooned around me like seaweed. I flailed instinctively, forgetting for a moment that my body couldn't respond the way it used to. My hearing aid squealed once, then fizzled into silence. Chlorinated water filled my mouth and nose. My arms moved like driftwood, too slow, too weak. My knees screamed in pain. I surfaced gasping, but the voices I heard weren't concerned. They were laughing. Martin stood at the pool's edge, holding my cane like a trophy, laughing like a boy who'd pulled a successful prank. "Cool off, Mom," he shouted. And then the others joined in. Snorts, giggles, scattered applause. One of Nate's friends pulled out a phone and started filming. I heard someone joke mermaid alert. Another somebody throw her a life preserver, wait, maybe a time machine. I reached for the pool's edge, my fingers slipping on the smooth tile. I tried to call out, but the sound came out thin. My arms shook from the effort. My shoulders ached from cold and strain. "Help," I said, barely audible. "Help." No one moved. No one moved except one. Milo. Without a word, without hesitation, he dropped his plate, kicked off his sneakers, and dove in. He surfaced beside me like a miracle. "Hold on to me, Grandma," he whispered. "I've got you." With his help, I clung to the edge, then the ladder. He pushed from beneath, bracing me as I climbed out inch by painful inch. My dress clung to me like a second soggy skin. I could feel every wrinkle, every bruise, every decade of my life outlined in that miserable cotton. The silver brooch Richard's gift was gone, washed away. A small crowd gathered nearby. The laughter had stopped, replaced by awkward shuffling and guilty eyes. Someone handed me a towel. Heather fussed, trying to appear concerned, but her eyes darted nervously around, worried about appearances. "God, Mum, it was just a joke," Martin said, holding the towel out like a peace offering. "You were always so dramatic." I didn't speak. Couldn't. Water dripped from my chin down the length of my body into my shoes. The old ache in my knees had turned into something sharp and insistent. My hearing aid was dead. My dignity felt like it had drowned. Heather appeared beside me. "Grandma, let's get you into some dry clothes. I have a dress that might fit you." "I want to go home," I said. "Oh, but we haven't had dessert yet," Heather objected. "And Leela wanted to show you her new bike." I said I want to go home. This time I spoke louder. This time my voice carried. The party went still. Martin looked irritated. He gestured to Milo. "Don't be silly, you're soaked. I'll take her home." "She's not a bag of groceries," Milo snapped. "She nearly drowned. Let me take her." I said I'll do it. Martin said, stepping in like this was a custody battle. Milo helped me to my feet, steadying me as my legs trembled. Someone had brought my cane. It was wet and slippery. I leaned on it anyway. I had no choice. "Here's your bag," Grandma Milo said softly, holding it out. The pouch with Leela's gift inside was soaked through. The music box was likely ruined. But I took it anyway. We passed the children's play area. Leela ran up with wide eyes. "Grandma Eleanor, why are you all wet?" Her voice was innocent, curious, unknowing. "I fell in the pool, honey," I said with a weak smile. "But it's no big deal." She tilted her head. Like a mermaid. Martin, walking ahead of us, chuckled. "Yeah, Grandma's our very old mermaid." Milo turned and shot him a look that could have cut through steel. He didn't respond, neither did I. I let him lead me to the car, my wet clothes soaking into the leather seat, my hands still trembling, my hearing gone, my skin chilled. The drive home was silent except for the shiver in my bones. Until I whispered, "Can you turn on the heat?" Martin glanced sideways. "In June." "I'm soaked," I replied, "and freezing." He sighed, exaggerated, but turned the knob anyway. Then he said the words that hardened something inside me for good. "Look, it was just a joke." Everyone laughed. "If you'd laughed with us, this wouldn't be such a big deal." I turned my face toward the window. I didn't respond. Because I knew in that moment there was no point. He didn't see me, and maybe he never really had. The next 3 days blurred into a damp, painful haze. I barely left my bed. It started that night chills that wouldn't leave a dry cough that turned into something deeper and meaner. My joints, already bruised from the fall, throbbed like war drums. The hip I had slammed against the pool wall swelled until it looked misshapen under my nightgown. My arms bore blotches, black, green, yellow, like I'd been painted by some cruel hand. By morning, the fever had set in. I shook under 3 layers of blankets, yet sweat soaked the sheets. I drank tea. I took what painkillers I had. I lay there in the dark, shivering, praying the silence would pass. No one called. Not Heather, not Martin, not even a text asking if I'd made it home safely. Only Milo, sweet Milo, called late on the second night. I couldn't get to the phone in time, and without my hearing aid, the ring was just a distant vibration in the walls. He left a voicemail. I could hear only bits of it by pressing the phone to my good ear. "Grandma, are you okay? I'm sorry. Call me if you need." I didn't call him back, not then, not because I didn't want to, but because I was too tired of being the one who always reached first. On the 3rd day, I dragged myself out of bed. My hair was matted. My skin sagged with the kind of weariness no spa treatment could fix. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself not with vanity, but with cold, clinical distance like I once examined ancient bone fragments. Purple bruises bloomed across my thighs as vivid as ink. My arms looked like parchment, thin, vulnerable, easily torn. The scarab brooch Richard had given me was gone, swept away by the chlorine tide. I hadn't even realized when it disappeared. Grief, humiliation, anger. They all swirled inside me, a toxic storm under my ribs. But worse than all of it was the silence. The loud, thunderous silence from the people who should have cared. I sat at my writing desk with a mug of tea I couldn't taste and stared at the unfinished letter to Ruth Calderon. The photos from the Syria dig were still there, their faint lines waiting to be deciphered. My typewriter sat ready, a blank sheet rolled in. My fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant, and then I started typing. Slow at first, arthritis stiffening my knuckles, but with each keystroke, something loosened. My mind sparked to life. I wasn't writing to escape, I was writing to reclaim. I wrote about the shard with the angular hatch marks, about the mineral deposits that hinted at cross-regional influence, about a nearly forgotten burial site I'd catalogued in '85, which bore striking similarity to the photos Ruth had sent. As I typed, my body still hurt, but my spirit, for the first time in days, did not. Halfway through the letter, the phone rang again, loud, insistent. I pulled it to my ear and squinted at the display Milo. "Grandma," he said, his voice a bit garbled but warm. "Are you okay? I've been worried." "Dad said you were refusing to take his calls." I laughed dry and hollow. "He said that." "Yeah, he said he tried a few times, that you were upset." "Funny," I said. "It's hard to refuse calls that never came." There was a pause on the other end. I imagined Milo sinking deeper into the couch, rubbing his forehead the way Edgar used to when frustrated. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I should have come sooner." "You're here now," I said. "That counts." We talked for a while. About his job. About Rachel, his new girlfriend. About the way he remembered watching me sort artifacts on our dining room table when he was little. I still remember the way you labeled everything he said. Each item had a story, even the broken bits. Especially the broken bits I corrected gently. They speak the loudest if you know how to listen. When we hung up, I sat quietly staring out the window at my garden. The lavender bush had bloomed again, despite the squirrels digging holes at its base. Resilience. I always admired that in plants. That evening, I brewed a stronger pot of tea and dared to crack open my old expedition journal from our trip to northern Mesopotamia. Richard's handwriting was there, in the margins, scratched notes about sediment layers and burial goods. Reading it was like hearing his voice again. It made me smile, then ache. By the end of the week, I had recovered enough to shuffle around the house. My hearing aid was still dead, completely ruined by the water, and my world had become muffled, as though I were living inside a snow globe. But even in the quiet, I could think. Maybe better than ever. I made an appointment with Dr. Chen, my audiologist, to get a new hearing aid. The assistant on the phone had a cheery voice that didn't quite hide the cost. "Your insurance will only cover a fraction, Dr. Vaughn," she said. "The model we recommend is $2,000. "That's fine," I replied with more certainty than I felt. "I'll make it work." I hung up, wrote a check for the down payment, and returned to my cataloguing. I sat at the desk for hours each day, fingers curled from stiffness but determined. I labeled every artifact in the boxes I had collected, over decades: pottery fragments, bronze tools, carved beads. Each one held a story. Each one was a reason to keep going. Martin hadn't called, neither had Heather, but I didn't need their voices in my ear to know what they'd say. "Are you still upset? It was just a joke. You're taking things too personally." I could hear it without sound. I could feel it like cold air creeping under a door. But I wasn't the same woman who walked into that party, and I certainly wasn't the same woman who walked out of that pool. I was done drowning in silence. I would speak, even if I had to speak louder than ever before. The day I walked into Dr. Chen's office for my hearing aid, fitting the receptionist greeted me with "Good morning, Ms. Vaughn." I didn't correct her, but when the audiologist came in and greeted me with a smile, she said, "Dr. Vaughn, it's good to see you again." And just like that, something deep inside me sat up straighter. I hadn't heard that title in years at least, not from someone who meant it. Not from someone who wasn't trying to pacify or placate me, but who acknowledged what I had earned. Not what I had survived or tolerated or accepted, but what I had built. My name is still Dr. Vaughn, and I'm done letting people forget that. The new hearing aid wasn't perfect, but it was sharp and clear. Expensive, yes. But I considered it a worthwhile investment in more than just sound. It was an investment in re-entering the world on my own terms. I stopped by the grocery store, on the way home, pushing the cart with one hand and my cane with the other. I didn't look frail that day. I looked focused. I picked up lemon's oats, strong black tea, and a small bouquet of lavender. I placed everything on the conveyor belt with precision. The cashier, a young woman with blue hair and chipped nail polish, scanned each item and said softly, "I love your brooch." I glanced down. Today I wore a replacement scarab, a gift from an old colleague given to me on my 70th birthday. It wasn't as meaningful as the one I lost in the pool, but today it carried defiance. "Thank you," I said. "It was a gift from fellow archaeologists." She smiled at me like I'd said something interesting, not pitiful. That meant more than she could have known. When I got home, I returned to the basement, the place I had avoided for far too long. The stairs were steep, but I took them slowly, gripping the handrail with the strength of a woman who had once scaled excavation cliffs with a pickaxe strapped to her back. The basement smelled faintly of dust and cedar. It was my museum, my archive, my time capsule. Each shelf bore the weight of a lifetime's work: catalogued artifacts, leather-bound journals, carefully labeled boxes with items wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. Richard and I had built this collection together. When we moved into this house, it was with the agreement that the basement would be our library, our private museum, our escape from the world of spreadsheets and PTA meetings and cookouts. We always imagined we'd grow old cataloguing it side by side, but life had other plans. I turned on the desk lamp and pulled out the old laptop Richard had insisted we buy. Digital archiving is the future, he'd said, even as he struggled with typing. The battery still held a charge. The file I opened was labeled Legacy Catalogue V1. It was untouched. That afternoon I began describing the first item, a fertility figurine from Anatolia, circa 1200 BCE. I typed with slow deliberation, cross-referencing my handwritten notes, comparing them with my field sketches. It wasn't just busy work, it was resurrection. I was giving voice to things long buried. Not just artifacts, but memories, discoveries, insights that could vanish forever if left undocumented. The hours passed unnoticed. By evening, I had catalogued a dozen items. My joints ached, but my mind felt light, like it used to after long days in the field. Tired but complete. I sat back in my chair, looked around at the artifacts on the shelves, and whispered aloud, "This is who I am. Not Mom, not Martin's burden, not the woman who fell in the pool. I am Dr. Eleanor Vaughn, anthropologist, scholar, explorer." The phone rang later that night. I recognized the number Martin. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. "Mum," he said, his voice tight. "I wanted to stop by Sunday. Chris wants to cook something simple. Just a quiet dinner. Nothing fancy." I hesitated. Dinner with Chris meant judgment disguised as hospitality. Polite critiques. Side eyes. The question of when are you going to move somewhere safer. Still, I said, "All right, Sunday." He exhaled like I'd agreed to sign over a kidney. "Great. I'll pick you up at 6. He hung up before I could say anything else. I stared at the receiver. Why did I agree? Perhaps because part of me still clung to the hope that he might see me. Not as someone he had to care for or manage or silence, but as the woman who raised him, educated him, sacrificed expeditions for his doctor's appointments and his school plays. Maybe somewhere beneath the layers of corporate fatigue and social conditioning, my son still remembered that woman. But if not, then fine. Because I hadn't done all this for him. I had done it for me. That night before bed, I made a list of the 10 most significant pieces in my collection. Not just for cataloguing purposes, but for something bigger. A lecture, perhaps. An exhibition. An offering. I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing. I was no longer waiting for my family to recognize my worth. The academic world hadn't forgotten me. Ruth hadn't forgotten me. My work hadn't been erased, it had just been waiting. Waiting for me to return to it. My name is still Dr. Vaughn, and I was just getting started. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of quiet dread that used to creep in before donor galas nights, when Richard and I had to swap our expedition boots for stiff shoes and polite smiles. I dressed carefully, a simple navy blouse slacks that didn't pinch a cardigan soft enough to armor myself in comfort. I wore my hearing aid, the new one, sharp and strong. Martin arrived 5 minutes early. Not a gesture of enthusiasm, just routine. "Ready?" he asked without stepping inside. "As I'll ever be," I replied. The ride to his house was filled with the sounds of the road. He didn't turn on the radio, but he didn't speak either. I wasn't in the mood to fill the silence. Let him sit in the discomfort for once. Their house was as pristine and impersonal as ever. Granite counters, sterile art prints, a couch no one looked comfortable sitting on. Chris met me at the door with a tight smile. "Alba," she said, as if pronouncing a foreign word. "So glad you could join us. I live 15 minutes away. It's not exactly a pilgrimage." She ignored the jab. She always did. Her armor was impervious, polite plastic and polished. Dinner was fried chicken dry and flavorless. Martin recited complaints about work. Chris spoke about her new hobby pickleball and her friend's detox retreat. They didn't ask about my work, didn't mention the symposium, didn't even ask about my hearing aid. So I sat and chewed and smiled and waited. It didn't take long. So Martin said, setting his fork down, "We've been talking and, well, we're concerned. Here it comes." Chris chimed in with faux sympathy. "It's just we saw what happened at the barbecue. You could have really hurt yourself." "Yes," I said flatly. If only someone had thought of that before shoving me into a pool. Chris blinked. She wasn't ready for bluntness. Martin cleared his throat. "We're just saying, Mom, you're not getting any younger." "None of us are," I said, "but go on." Chris leaned forward, elbows on the table. "We've looked into some options. There are wonderful communities, not nursing homes per se, but safe supervised environments with people your age. There's one in Westfield. It's really lovely. And convenient," I added, "for you." Martin frowned. "It's not about convenience, it's about safety." I pushed my plate aside, appetite gone. "Let's be honest. You don't see me as a person anymore. You see me as a risk, a responsibility. Something that might fall in the shower or leave the stove on. We're just trying to help," Chris insisted, but her voice had an edge. "We're not the bad guys here." "No," I said quietly. "You're just people who want me to disappear in a way that feels polite." Martin slammed his napkin on the table. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I asked. "You humiliated me in front of your colleagues. No apology, no concern. And now you want to tuck me away so you don't have to worry about another scene." Chris looked to Martin, seeking backup. "We're only trying to make a plan for when things change." "I'll tell you when they change," I snapped. "And until then, I make the plans." A heavy silence settled over the table. "I appreciate your concern," I said, voice steady. "But I am not moving anywhere. I am not a fragile artifact to be archived. I am not done yet. Chris tried again, softer now. You'd be with people your age, peers. I have peers, I said, colleagues, students, academics who still value my voice. Martin looked away, and for the first time I saw it. Shame, not for what he'd done, but because deep down he knew he hadn't tried to know me in years. The rest of the meal was filled with the clink of cutlery and small talk about the weather. When Martin drove me home, he didn't walk me to the door. He waited in the car while I climbed the steps alone. As I stepped inside, I exhaled long and low. The house smelled like lemon oil and books. I brewed tea. I sat at my desk, and I opened the letter from Ruth again. She'd sent more images. This time I didn't hesitate. I spread them out like cards on a table. I turned on my task light. I clicked open the laptop and resumed my notes. They may try to bury me in nice linens and well-intentioned dismissal, but I still had work to do, still had a voice, still had things to say that could change what people thought they knew about the world. And when I spoke again, it would not be as someone's burden. It would be as someone who remembered exactly who she was. It had been nearly a decade since I'd stood at a podium, but when I arrived at the Gladstone Museum that Thursday afternoon, I felt none of the fear I expected, only purpose. Margaret Phelps, the museum's director, greeted me at the entrance, with both hands clasped warmly around mine. "Dr. Vaughn," she said with real reverence. "We're honored." I nodded, adjusting the strap of my handbag over my shoulder. Inside were my notes, a few annotated images, and the first draft of an article I'd begun developing from Ruth's inquiry. My cane tapped quietly against the marble floor as Margaret led me through the atrium. Posters lined the hallway walls, Treasures of the Ancient World, a lecture series. Beneath today's date was my name, in bold serif font, Dr. Eleanor Vaughn, Rewriting History, Pottery, and the Secret Trade Routes of Mesopotamia. The title made me chuckle. I never liked grandiose headlines, but Margaret had insisted. When we entered the lecture room, I froze. Not from nerves, from surprise. The room was full, more than full. Students, professors, museum patrons, even some out-of-town archaeologists I recognized from old conferences. Dozens of faces turned toward me as Margaret announced, "Our guest has arrived." Then applause. Not a polite smattering, not a welcome formality. Genuine applause. People stood. People smiled. People who had no idea I'd spent the last 2 weeks debating whether I still mattered. I made my way to the podium, my cane clicking with each step. A museum aide helped me adjust the microphone. Behind me, the projector hummed to life, casting the first slide onto the screen, a photograph of me and Richard standing beside a trench wall in Tel Halaf, both of us sunburned and grinning. I cleared my throat. The room quieted. "Good afternoon," I began. "It's been some time since I gave a talk like this. The last time, I believe, was in Cairo 5 months before my husband passed. He always said I spoke better when I forgot who was listening. So, if you'll forgive me, I'll speak not to impress, but to remember." Laughter broke out gently, then faded. And then I did what I had feared I couldn't. I taught. I spoke of Mesopotamian ceramic hatching of trade patterns along the Euphrates, of what it meant to uncover a story from fragments. I spoke of traveling by camel into desert basins, of holding beads worn by people long gone, of the quiet thrill when the ground gives you back something it once swallowed. As I spoke, the room stayed still. No shuffling, no coughing, no bored glances at watchers. They listened. They saw me, not as an old woman who once had a career, but as a woman still in her prime, at least in mind, if not in body. After the talk, questions came in waves. A young woman barely older than Leela asked about the methodology I used for dating kiln residue. A man from Princeton complimented the specificity of my typology charts. One student, wide-eyed, whispered, "I read your thesis in undergrad. You made archaeology feel alive." And for a moment I felt alive too. Margaret brought me tea during the reception afterward and said, "You have no idea what today meant to our students. You've shown them that expertise doesn't have an expiration date." I nearly wept, not because of sentiment, but because someone had said the thing I had known quietly all along and had no one else to say it to. Back at home that night, I sat in my study. The notes from my talk were still in my bag, slightly crumpled, but I didn't unpack them. I just sat with the feeling of being heard, of being respected, of being me. The phone rang and I checked the display. Martin. I didn't answer. A minute later it rang again, Heather. Still I let it ring. I wasn't angry. I just wasn't willing to let the noise of their discomfort interrupt the quiet strength of what I had reclaimed. A little later the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even stood up. Martin stood on the doorstep, red-faced. Heather trailed behind him, lips tight, arms crossed like she was bracing for an earthquake. "What's the meaning of this?" Martin said, storming inside. "Why didn't you come to Leela's birthday?" I closed the door slowly, calmly. "Hello, Martin. Hello, Heather. Would you like to sit?" They didn't. "We waited for you all day," Heather added. "Leela kept asking where you were." "I'm sure you found something to tell her," I said. "Perhaps that I had other plans." Martin blinked. "Plans? What plans are more important than your great-granddaughter's birthday?" I looked him dead in the eye. "An archaeological symposium in my honor. At the National Museum. 100 people attended, several from Oxford and Princeton. I gave a lecture on my life's work." Heather scoffed. "That's nice, but this was Leela's birthday." "To Leela," I replied, "I am a stranger. You've made sure of that." Martin's mouth opened, then shut. He wasn't expecting honesty. I continued, "I will not apologize for choosing to stand in a room where I was seen and respected, rather than in a backyard where I was ignored or worse, ridiculed." "You're overreacting," he snapped. "You always do." "No," I said, "not anymore." Heather's voice cracked. "Are you giving up on your family?" "No. I'm giving up the role you've written for me. The one where I am the fragile, quiet, grateful old woman who is supposed to smile at cruel jokes and stay in the corner." The silence stretched. "From now on," I said softly, "you may visit me if you wish. But if you come to manage me, belittle me, or suggest yet again that I'm ready for a care home, I would rather you didn't come at all." They stood there stunned, not angry, not even defensive, just lost, because they'd just been told for the first time that I didn't need them to define me. "Come on, Heather," Martin muttered. "She's in one of her moods." And they left, without a goodbye, without a backward glance. But this time I didn't watch them go, because I had already arrived somewhere better.